Hi, my name is Matthew, and today I want to talk to you about a piece I'm supposed to analyze for a composition class. Now, I'm supposed to write a short response, but I thought talking about would be a little bit more fun. The piece I'm talking about is Stars by Eric Esenvald. It's a setting of a poem by Sarah Teasdale. The poem is a depiction of a person who's standing on a hill looking up at the night sky. So let's get started right away. I've got the poem up on the screen, and it does a really great job setting the stage. A person's alone on a dark hill, and it gives like a setting that we're not really sure if this is a good or bad situation. And as the poem goes, it kind of becomes more uplifting, and we'll see that in the music as well. I love the way the poem personifies the stars. Things like them having hearts of fire or them marching stately and still. These are really great things that they do. Now, the song gets rid of this line, marching stately and still, but that's okay because it really does a great job depicting it musically. I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's actually get started with the music. The piece opens up using glass as an accompaniment. And what I mean by that is like if you took wine glasses and you filled it up with water and used your finger to rub it and produce a sound. It's a really brilliant way to create this shimmering effect. I think he's doing this to kind of depict the stars. The piece starts off on this B minor third, and I think it's a really great job to kind of introduce us into the key, but it's still early in the song, so we don't get a full sense of the fact that this is a song in B minor, at least to start off. Immediately afterwards, he adds in some major seconds to this minor third, and it creates this beautiful chord cluster, really dives into this shimmer. He's going to move back and forth between these two throughout the song, and eventually going into a bit more of a complex chord cluster. I find that this whole song is really about tension building and release, which I know arguably is pretty much any music, but I think Eric Eschenwald is really working hard to make this happen. He does this a lot by creating suspension from one chord into another throughout the different voices. You'll see two beats of a suspension and then two beats of that suspension being released and going into the chord tones of the next chord. Eric immediately goes into his tension release suspension in the sopranos and altos. We get this alone in the night. On alone, the altos have this downward line that creates a clash between the soprano and alto notes. And then we immediately on beat 3 get a release into the next chord. He does this throughout the song. There are a couple of cases where he'll expand that tension over 4 beats, but for the most part, he'll do this 2 beat kind of tension building and then 2 beats of release, and it keeps happening over and over, and it's absolutely beautiful. This suspension really adds this to the shimmer of the song, which once again is just depicting the stars beautifully. The entrance of the lower voices right here does a really good job of kind of solidifying us in the key of B minor. We start seeing this rising line as well on with pines around me, spicy and still, and I think this is a really great job to kind of build up to these notes. But we also get what's called a messa di voce, which is basically a crescendo and decrescendo. This is a really great job to kind of build, once again, tension with the crescendo and release with the decrescendo. And he'll do this a lot throughout the song as well. I also want to bring up the fact that on the word spicy, he extends this tension building through the use of suspension, something that I was talking about before, where he did 2 beats on, 2 beats off. Now he's extending it even longer, which I think is a really great way to depict the word spicy. By the way, if anyone can tell me why pines can be spicy, I'd love to know because I have no idea. Something I've noticed in a lot of Eric Eschenwald's music is the use of these pure tones kind of move the music forward. He does this a lot by doing a hum, going up to a nice tall ah vowel, and he'll use some O's in there as well. But I think this kind of to ah is another way that he's building tension and then releasing. We have this closed off vowel and then it opens up to a beautiful open vowel and the chord opens up with it. I want to point out here as well that earlier upward line that we were seeing with pines around me, spicy and still, he's doing it again, but he extends it even further at this section. And what I love is that with the extension, we expect it to get to this really big final chord, but it doesn't. The low voices stop, and we just get these two notes to carry out that, once again, B minor triad. Once again, we get this closed vowel to open vowel sound back and forth with the messa di voce. Get this big crescendo. The chords open up as we go, so that way the soprano notes can get even higher, and that leads to this beautiful climactic moment where we switch from B minor into D major. I think this is a great way to match the tone of the poem. The poem's words aren't really depicting anything like upbeat or depressing. It's just kind of floating somewhere in this ambiguous middle ground. But right here, we get this kind of uplifting moment, and he does this through this key change into D major. With this, I also want to point out that he is using a lot of chords in inversion. What I mean by that, for those people who might not know, is that a chord has, generally three notes, and he's taking one of those notes and bringing it underneath the others. In particular, he's using the fifth as the lowest note in the chord. Now, for those people who know music theory, they'll know that that inversion tends to be really unstable, but he does this pretty consistently. In fact, we don't often get a lot of chords with the root in the bass. I think that adds to this shimmer effect that he's doing as well. He doesn't want a solid, beautiful, you know, chord that has this kind of foundation built into it. He wants things to be floating throughout, so he doesn't give it to us until, these big moments, especially at the end. I mentioned before that Eric Esenvald actually takes a line out of the poem. I think he does this to revisit the words "heaven full of stars." I think he wants to bring that back as kind of the climactic moment, which of course a poem doesn't necessarily do. So he takes out the line "marching stately and still" and instead tries to depict this within the music. He does this through these moving lines that still kind of rest in this uncertain tonality, utilizing chords in, funky inversions and things like that to kind of produce this still effect, but with this movement in voices. Right here at the end, we get this repeated line, "heaven full of stars," definitely building to the climactic moment in the piece. He repeats this kind of musical phrase twice in order to build into this final moment where where the soprano ones jump up to this high A and kind of let that note carry the rest of the choir through this back and forth between this tension and release, moving between the one chord and the four chord, which I think is a really great way to kind of focus in on that tonality without getting that standard 1-5-1-5-1 that we saw in, older music. I also want to point out that one of the recordings I listened to actually does a forte piano crescendo on this last stars before going into the open ah vowels, which I think is a really beautiful way to build that dynamic moment to this final beautiful harmony, the climactic moment of the piece. The song then starts to kind of move down and away from this climactic moment. And I love that it's bringing out a soloist to sing out this high note, kind of creating this distance effect. To me, it feels like night is fading and we're going back into dawn. I talked about at the end how it really is kind of centering us into this tonality. The glasses have been going into more complex chord clusters, and right now we are going back into going between this B minor third into a big chord cluster back and forth, and instead the chorus is just sitting on one chord. Eric Eschenwald does a really great job focusing in on this D major chord, especially in the way he utilizes the altos. The altos just sing this last line on the pitch D, really focusing in on the fact that this is our final chord, that this is kind of the end of the song. And once again, this kind of diminishing effect away from the big climactic moment we had just a little while ago with night fading into day. Right at the end, we get this beautiful final chord, utilizing the tenors to create that shimmering chord cluster effect with the rest of the voices kind of solidifying us on that D major chord. I just, I love this song. It's so beautiful. It's so well written, and I could listen to it over and over again. So thank you for letting me share this with you. Hopefully this video didn't end up being too long, but for those of you who watched it, I really appreciate it.